Okay, so without further ado, welcome to Stats in the Time of COVID-19. And I'd like to welcome our presenter, Angela Fox from the Library Development Office here at the Indiana State Library. Angela.
Great. Okay. Am I unmuted? Are we good? Okay, fantastic. So as Beth said, welcome to everybody who's viewing this webinar, whether you're watching it in real time here on the 28th, or if you're watching a recording down the road. Hopefully by the time you're done with this recording, you would know how I would record this webinar in my statistics, both live and virtual, if I were to do it for the State Library, because these are definitely some rapidly changing times. So we do have a lot of ground to cover today because there's so many things that have shifted just in the last few months as far as what we'd like you to track, what's going to count for programming, for open hours, what you have to worry about with standards, all sorts of good things. As Beth said, we got a lot of questions submitted ahead of time. We've also been watching listservs. I know the sort of questions I've been getting in my inbox and in my voicemail. So hopefully we will address the bulk of those. And most of them fell into a couple different categories. So what we're going to try to hit today during the course of this presentation, assuming I can move my slide forward. Here we go. So just real quick, we're going to touch on why we even bother keeping these stats, because it's something we've actually seen come up in the listserv. And we realize if you're a newer director, or if you're a person who doesn't necessarily fill out the annual report, maybe you just collect stats and pass that on to someone, you may not really know why we're even making you do this or what purpose they serve. So we're going to cover that really quickly because it informs what sort of stats we keep and why we make the decisions we do as to what counts and what doesn't and what metrics to use. Other things we'll touch on real quickly, what trends we're expecting to see or already seeing in 2020. There's a lot of concern about what's happening to your numbers out there in library land. A lot of concern because, to put it nicely, the standard usual metrics that we measure for library success, how many visits you have, how many reference questions, what's your circulation like, those numbers look awful for most everybody right now, and that's kind of a reality when your libraries are closed. So we're going to talk about what things we're expecting to see, what that means for you. And then finally, we'll spend the bulk of the time on what stats you actually are going to want to be recording. If you haven't already, what stats you'll need to start recording. The new things that will pop up on the annual report that will ask you that have been added directly in relation to COVID, and try to answer some of those detail-oriented questions we're getting about how to get those actual metrics. If you're doing virtual programs, what number that Facebook gives you, what number are you supposed to use, or what does engagement versus reach mean, or how do you find this number on different platforms? So we'll try to speak to some of that. So to kick off, the importance of reporting stats. So what do we do with the number anyway? Why are we putting you through all of this? I can tell you what it is not. It is not to act as some sort of grade card or evaluation. We're not sitting here in the state library looking at people's numbers and going, that library, oh my gosh, what are they doing wrong? Or what? That's not the purpose at all. When I talk about stats and I immediately bring up annual report, it's because it's pretty much interchangeable in my mind. The annual report is how we get our stats from you. This is the one time a year we get a massive stat dump from everybody in the state. And what we do with those numbers and where we get those numbers is we actually ask a lot of questions. A lot of our stats related questions come directly from IMLS. They have a National Public Library Survey full of data elements, different statistical metrics that every single state in the nation is required to ask their public libraries. We take those questions that they require of us and we report back to them after the annual report is done. So when you're getting the annual report in December through March, when you're filling that out, a lot of those questions are directly from IMLS. Everything that we're required to ask has been rolled up into that report. We also add a lot of state elements or a lot of state questions to that because it's things that we need here in Indiana, state-specific things we need to know. Indiana has standards, so we include questions on standards, things that might affect Indiana Library directly. But the reason we do this is honestly, it is a fantastic historical document. As I said, this is nationally where you get your data on libraries. If anybody, any scholar, any reporter, any advocate for librarians, any government official, anybody who wants to know anything about what has happened to libraries past and present, how they're serving their patrons over the last 50 years, this is where you would go, is to the annual report, because you can look at budgets, you can look at programming, you can see when did people start having kids programming surge, when did people start adding a bunch of money for digital checkouts, when did that tide turn. You can really see it as a historical document. You can track the trends. You can see what happens to libraries' numbers when they're in a recession. We're going to see what happens to libraries' numbers when we're in a pandemic. But it is a fantastic historical document. It is a fantastic source of data that you can use, again, for advocacy purposes. It is fantastic for trends if you want to see what's happened in the past and what's happening in the future. It's great as a comparative tool. If you as a director or a librarian want to see how other libraries, similar sizes, similar populations, how they compare to yours, how they, how their numbers are for programming, how much money they put towards different things, this is where you would go for it. So IMLS collects that data and makes it all public for those reasons. We collect that data, we make it all public on our site for the exact same reasons. We want everyone to be able to follow those trends, to look up, what they need to know historically, to be able to compare, how am I doing compared to other Class C libraries? I mentioned that we have some data elements that we add that are not required. One of the ones we do is a salary table. All of the salary questions, those are on there because we have so many questions from people wanting to know what's a good amount to pay my employees, how much do I need to pay them, am I in a good number? So again, it's great for comparative purposes. We want to offer that to you as a tool. It is not being something that it's not something we sit up here in our library and again sit there and plot each other against each other and see how you're doing, see how one library compares to another. That's not the purpose, and that's why one of the reasons you really don't have to worry about what's happening to your numbers. And finally, we do use our annual report as a way to check standards. We want to help every library to achieve standards. We can only know if you're there, if you're close, if you're falling out of standards, based on how you answer those questions in the annual report. That brings me to one of the most frequent questions I was seeing in the submitted questions, which is, what's going to happen to our standards in 2020? We're having trouble meeting certain standards because our libraries are closed. Just to put it officially in writing, we have it on our site at other points, I believe. I know Jen Clifton has spoken to this on some of the listservs and some meetings that we've shared out. There will be statewide waivers just for everyone automatically in 2020 for hours, and that includes meeting evening hours, total open hours, weekend hours. If you're unable to meet it because of your closing, because you've had to shift funds or staffing to different areas, automatic waiver. Number of programs, the children's reading program, if you weren't able to get one going this year or you weren't able to continue it for the full number of weeks. And finally, collection expenditures, because again, we realize people are having to shift their budgets to cover unexpected expenses, to deal with what's happening right now. So we've always required that 8% of your budget be spent on collection expenditures. That's not going to be the case in 2020. Of course, we'd love you to be able to do that. We're hoping most libraries can still reach that. If you can't, it is going to be an automatic waiver. And then we will do case-by-case reviews for 5-year plans. We need people to have a plan on file, but if you have been delayed in submitting your plan, if there's issues with submitting your plan because of what's happened with the shutdown and you need a little bit of extra time, but you're in progress, we'll talk to you library by library and figure out where you are with that. So hopefully a lot of the things that you're worried about with your numbers and statistics as related to standards are going to be a non-issue, because we know it's going to be something that happens to everyone that is out of your control. So as far as trending stats, I've already touched on this a little bit, but we are seeing what they're doing to numbers and are going to continue to do to numbers. And I cannot reassure libraries of this enough. That's okay. It does not reflect on you. It's not your fault that you can't let people into your building for large parts of 2020. So things that we are expecting at the state library, things that my counterparts in the other states are expecting and are we, again, already seeing things that are trending down, circulation. You might see an uptick in digital resources, but overall, when people aren't going into the building and browsing your shelves and filling up their bags, that's definitely going down. Clearly, the visits are going to go down. It happens when your libraries are closed. Programming and attendance, people are doing fantastic with virtual programming, coming up with alternatives, wonderful things to do online, but we're still seeing decided hits in those numbers. Children's reading programs, there's been a lot of concern and worry, especially on children's listservs, about what's happening to their numbers. We've had people say our attendance is down, 50, 60. I've seen 90% thrown out there a couple times, and wondering, is this normal? Is this going to be a problem? Yes, it is normal. No, it's not going to be a problem. It is happening to everyone. And again, I say this nationally because I'm on some listservs. This is not an Indiana thing. This is a nationwide thing. You are in really good company if you're struggling to keep your numbers up, because we're all adjusting on the fly, and what's the norm is no longer our norm. And then finally, reference interactions. I know most people are doing some sort of remote reference and continue to do remote reference even during closures. But again, still, we're seeing those numbers go down because people can't come up to the desk and say, oh, as long as I'm here, or, oh, can you help me on this website? They're not there to have those interactions. We have seen some numbers go up. I mentioned digital resources. Some people are moving money into purchasing more ebooks, so those holdings are going up, those checkouts are going up. For people who record how many digital library cards they have, we've had a lot of reports of the digital card registrations going up. And obviously, there are huge services or surges in no contact services. Some libraries had been doing virtual programming prior to this. The vast majority are learning on the fly. We're seeing large numbers of live streaming programs, recorded programs, and curbside service, which was offered by a tiny handful of libraries before this, is now becoming a fact of life for most of you. So we're seeing those numbers go up. And I mentioned the expected trends because we keep getting, what does this mean for us? How is this going to affect us? What this means is when we look at these statistics in the future and we see these huge downturns, we're going to know that's what a pandemic does to your library. We're trying to add these new data elements and these new questions because we want to capture the ways that you've adapted to it. We want to capture that you're now doing curbside service and you're now doing virtual programming. So what it means is it's completely okay if your traditional metrics go down, because we're hoping to show that while those are going down, here is what libraries are doing. Here is what libraries have innovated and come up with to try to serve their patrons. So that's why it's so important. We're encouraging people, record those numbers as they are. Don't feel like you have to try to boost them or look for every little nudge you can. Don't try to artificially inflate them, because that's showing the reality. And we're trying to really reflect that for the future. And that's what we have here. It is not a typical year. We don't expect the statistics to be typical. We just want to stress that more than anything, we want to record what is actually happening, because that is what's going to be useful moving forward.
Hey, Angela.
Yes.
Can I butt in really quick?
Sure.
I just wanted to also emphasize that this is a really great time to start, if you're not already, to start looking at narrative ways to tell your library story. So maybe you don't have the statistics this year to show everything awesome that you're doing, but make sure you're taking note of those stories, those patrons that have expressed their gratefulness for whatever you're doing, those unusual circumstances or usual circumstances, and make sure you're recording those for your own library in some way. That's not something you necessarily report to us, although I know that the Indiana Library Federation is looking for those stories. So you can always contact Lucinda over at ILF if you want to share a story like that. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that it's not all statistics. That's not the only way that we tell our story about what we're doing. Okay, I'll let you take it back over.
Actually, that's such a fantastic point. And I will mention, one of my other roles here at the State Library is working with LSTA grants, and I have to report to IMLS about the cool things our libraries are doing with those grants. And I give them all sorts of statistical measures, but the person who oversees the program, the thing he loves when I give him and the things that he passes on to his superiors and that they pass on to government officials and that they use, the tool they use, is when I pass on those stories that have been shared with me. Oh my gosh, we had a mom who said that their child hated all things to do with reading until they went to this program and now they can't stop. And those are the things that really do make powerful tools. So if you have a way to record that, if you have a way to keep those stories that are so important and know that those are going to be great tools for you moving forward, it really does have an impact. And I've seen that from other aspects of my job when my contacts, my person in IMLS says, yeah, those numbers are great, but I want more of those stories. I want more of those emails. That's what people feel passionate about. Having said that, let's go back to the numbers. Let's go back to that qualitative stuff because we are still tracking that. So I mentioned it, I keep saying it's not a typical year. We don't expect typical numbers. Not a typical year, don't expect typical numbers. However, we are trying to record those non-typical numbers, again, to reflect what is happening. So we are adding new questions, and not just we, the State Library, but IMLS. That set of questions that I said we're all required to answer, IMLS has added a lot of questions to the annual report in an effort to capture what's happening in the library right now. They have added 15 questions that all libraries will be required to answer. That sounds like a lot. I will go through them with you now. Know that almost all of them, every single question except for the final two, are yes, no questions. So they decided to try to find a balance between putting a burden on libraries as far as reporting. They didn't want to overburden you with so many numbers and so many things you had to record, but at the same time, they wanted to get some record of what you are doing, the sort of work that is being put in. So we have the series of yes, no questions. So the things that IMLS has just recently announced will be in all of our annual reports, including the Indiana one. Yes, no questions on, did you close an outlet due to COVID-19? Yes or no? Did you offer public services during COVID-19? And if you're wondering what those public services are, pretty much all of the questions that follow on the next couple slides are what they mean by that. So yes, no, did you offer them? Yes, no, electronic materials added due to COVID-19. So did you specifically increase your electronic materials more than you had already anticipated doing, more than you had budgeted for originally? Electronic library cards issued before COVID-19. Was it something you already did? Electronic library cards issued during COVID-19. Are you doing it during the pandemic? Did you do it before? Are you doing it now? Did you just start now? Reference service during COVID-19. And this is going to include any sort of remote reference. Are you doing it via chat online? Are you doing it via, ask a librarian, submit an email? Are you doing telephone reference? If it's a remote reference service, you can answer yes to that. Outside service during COVID-19, or what we would call curbside. So they are asking, did you offer it? They don't need to know how many people. That is beyond what they are worried about right now. Right now, they just want to be able to say how many libraries offered this. And that, again, is going to be an important part of the puzzle. When people say, ooh, wow, library visits went down, there will be another question saying, yes, but look at this, 70% of our libraries started offering curbside. So just tell us yes or no on that. IMLS wants to know if you offered live virtual programs during COVID-19. And if you offered recordings of program content during COVID-19. And put a pin in this because that's what IMLS wants to know. We at the state want to know more, and we'll touch on that in just a bit. They want to know if you had external Wi-Fi access before COVID-19. And that would mean, external would mean, can your patrons access it from the library? Do they have to be in the physical building or can they get it on your campus? So did you have it before? Did you add it specifically during COVID-19? Is it something that you increased? Some libraries specifically boosted their Wi-Fi. Some libraries who had turned Wi-Fi off at night turned it on again during this time period. So did you increase that Wi-Fi access in any way? Did you have staff that was reassigned during COVID-19? And then these final two are the only two out of all of those IMLS questions that are going to require an actual number. And the first one is the number of weeks that you had an outlet closed during COVID-19. And the second is the number of weeks that an outlet had limited occupancy due to COVID-19. So if you reopened to a limited degree, if you let people in if you had, limited hours, if you had an hour where only seniors could come in, if you had to change your regular operating hours, if you had to reduce them, but you were partially open to the public during them, that's going to count as a week that you had limited occupancy. So we just need the number of weeks that was happening. So that's what IMLS wants to know. 13 yes/no questions and 2 questions about how many weeks this was happening.
Hey, Angela, I have one quick question.
Sure.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is specific. Somebody wants to know, how are they defining the COVID-19 time period? Is there like a cutoff date, or is it pretty loose?
I will look at the official definition, and I will let people know if this is wrong, but I would say that when it affected your library. If you started changing policy, if in March you said, oh my gosh, we need to think about whether we want to stay open, we need to, if you have been open X number of weeks prior to this, and in December you are less, even though technically you could be open, in December you are still operating fewer hours than you were at the start of the year, that you can argue that's because of COVID-19. If you are doing anything differently because of what started happening virus related in our states at the start of this year, or towards the start of this year, there's not a hard date, it's just when it started affecting you. So from that start point that you were affected, that's what they want to know. Okay, so the data elements added by Indiana State Library. We have had a lot of libraries tell us that they are doing grab and go activities, or make and take activities, as they'd be called. So prepared activities, things in a bag, in a kit that people can just come in, take from the library. They don't do them there. It's entirely something to do at home, but the librarians have taken the time to put those materials together, to put those craft pieces together, to put the instructions, the slips to go to this website and follow along, and here's the pieces to use. We are asking, did you offer them beforehand? Is this something you did before? Yes or no? Did you offer this during COVID? Yes or no? There will be an optional space for those of you who are recording the number. That would be fantastic if you can give us that number so we have an idea of how many people are partaking. It is optional. If you don't have that number, that's fantastic. We just know some people are tracking it. If they're tracking it, we'd love to have it. Don't feel panicked if you say, oh my gosh, we've had hundreds walk out the door and I haven't been following. That's fine. That question is optional. I mentioned there is we have a lot of questions, additional questions on virtual programming that IMLS doesn't. For various reasons, they want to keep it as simple as possible. They want to be able to compare apples to apples from year to year. So they are looking, they really want to keep their focus on live in-person programming. And so their questions are simply, are you doing the digital programming? Whereas we want a little bit more of a data dive on that digital programming as far as the types you're doing and how many people are coming. Before I get into that, I do want to mention reference, because we saw several questions ahead of time on reference questions, and most of them had to do with, hey, our reference numbers are down, but the questions we're getting and the questions we anticipate getting are going to be really time consuming. People needing help filing for unemployment, people needing help on these various government websites or navigating this. And isn't there a way to measure that? How can we measure these really time consuming longer questions? IMLS is continuing to count reference as they always do. We have never traditionally made a distinction between reference, whether it's the 2-second, hey, what's the second book in that James Patterson Dead Lady series, versus, hey, how do I make a resume? Those are two very different questions, and they take a very different amount of time. And in the eyes of IMLS and ISL, they are still considered reference questions. They meet the criteria. It's all kind of a wash. That being said, as of last year, even prior to COVID, we had enough suggestions from directors saying, hey, we're watching our numbers go down, and you keep saying, tell our story, tell what we're doing. What we're doing is less reference, but very time-intensive one-on-one reference. Is there a way we can reflect that? So as of last year here at the state, we added a second reference question asking if you offer instructional reference services and how many of those you offered if you were keeping track of those separately. And we defined instructional reference service as one-on-one interactions that are considered reference. They meet all the criteria, but are typically far more time-consuming and involved than traditional reference transactions. So it says it's meant to capture more involved instruction and not simple one-off questions such as turning on a device, finding an icon, etc. They may be scheduled in advance, they may be drop-in consultations, and some of the examples we give would be help on small device uses, getting a book on your phone or your Kindle, computer instruction, resume help, proctoring. Those are all sorts of reference services, reference questions that have always traditionally counted as one question, but take a lot more time than many others. So we are going to continue on our state survey to ask if you offer instructional reference service. If you separate it out, it is still not required. It is still more of a burden than some libraries can take on time-wise right now to try to sort those out. If you do that, if you sort them out, please give us that number. So you can give us the total number of reference and how many reference questions did you answer? 100. How many instructional reference questions did you answer? 62. You answered 100 total, 62 of those were referenced. So we're just having you pull those out if you have those numbers. And again, it's because it's a great way to sort of show why those numbers are going down in some categories, the number of people coming in, the number you have, and yet we're still, the time commitment may be going up. So again, we're trying to capture those shifting priorities and this shifting services we have. So moving on to programming, because this is the real difference for this year. The programs that we will be asking or discussing in Indiana, there's 3 types of programs, and I'm going to hit on all of them real quick and then try to hit some specific questions. We have in-person programs, virtual programs that are live or live streamed, and virtual programs that are recorded and posted. So in-person programming, I don't think there's much I need to say about this. This is our bread and butter. Everybody knows what an in-person program is. Hopefully you were doing some of those before COVID shut you down. Hopefully there will be a chance at some point in the future to do them again. But we still need the typical questions on these. We want the number of in-person programs you had. We will ask you to categorize them by their target audience. Was it a children's program, a teens, an adult, or a general/family program? And we will ask you to record attendance. I think it's worth noting here, just based on some of the questions I got, that we are asking you to record attendance at a children's program, at a YA program, and that is different than asking you to record young adult attendance at a program. We don't need you to break it out within the program itself, we just need a total within that program. So if you have a children's story time, you may have 20 kids and 15 adults, you record 35 in that children's attendance category. Not all of them were children, but there were 35 that attended that children's program. So we are continuing to do in-programming questions, or in-person programming questions the same way we always have. Now we've added virtual live. These are programs that, again, are live streaming programs that people who are participating, they're doing it remotely, but they're doing it in real time with the presenter. So we will ask you the number of programs. Just as we did with in-person programs, we do need to know the target audience on these. So just a broad category, who is your target audience? Is it mainly aimed at the kids? Is it teens, adults, or again, general? There may be a lot of general, I feel, coming with these virtual live programs. We've seen signs that they're trying to do some broader appeal on some of these. So just tell us which ones they are. And again, we'll want to know the attendance for these. And attendance for a streaming program would be the number of people you have on your stream. So the number of people who are participating, again, in real time during that stream. And we'll get to some of those breakdown of the metrics in just a bit. Virtual recorded, those are going to be the number of programs that you have recorded and posted that a patron can view at any time of their convenience. So if you set up a tripod in a room and you spoke into that camera and then you uploaded it to YouTube or you uploaded it to Facebook or whatever platform you used, but at no point was it live, was anyone able to watch it as you were recording it? If it was purely born recorded, it's going to go into this category. And we will ask you the number of recordings, and we will ask you for the number of views or hits, however, whatever metric your site uses for those. As far as the time frame on this, what we need is any hits or views that are happening on those recorded programs during 2020. We record for the 2020 calendar year. So some of those programs, if you had a program that you put up in June and you didn't take it down until November, any hits and amassed during that time can go into your virtual recorded hits / attendance category. If you have story times and you leave them up for a week and you take them down and you put up a different one, just put up those hits that it amassed during the week. It's up to you how long you want to put them up. If you get a constant stream of traffic, it may behoove you to keep them up just because your patrons are clearly enjoying it. But as long as you are getting those hits during the year 2020, go ahead and count them there. So,
hey, Angela, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We have a couple of questions of clarification. Let's see. It looks like you're going to answer one of these questions, but somebody wanted to know why ask for intended audience for live but not recorded? What's the difference?
This goes back to the IMLS versus our library. IMLS does not want data on recorded programs. They are not interested in it. They have made it very clear they want that separate. They are very interested in live programs because for them, the most important thing that they're really focusing on is the opportunity for patron interaction. And they said, at this point, we're not worried about recorded programs because you're not having that interaction between your staff. There's not a chance for community, anything like that. So IMLS doesn't want it. They consider live programming to be live and in person. They are also accepting live streaming programs. So because they are accepting both of those categories and they require age groups for those, we have you answer the age group for live streaming because we're going to combine those numbers. We're going to say, here's your in-person, here's your live streaming, add those together, tell IMLS, here's our total live programming in person, and clump it all together and give it to them. And because they are requiring this and they are requiring our age groups, that's why we're asking you to go ahead and record that as live because that's part of their metric. For us, we are not as interested in age group. We're just trying to capture the sort, are we offering this? Are we doing it a lot? Is it getting a lot of hits? I keep talking about the burden of reporting because this is a lot of questions and a lot of new statistics. And we didn't see a need to ask for what age group for these ones that you're posting on your site because we at the state library don't necessarily have a need for that as much as we have a need just to know you're doing it. So you're free. You can always, we will never tell you not to record stats for yourself. If you're like, oh, well, we would like to know what we're doing, or we want our board to know, or, fantastic, that's fabulous. We just won't have a place for it on the annual report because not everybody is going to be having another category where they can check which one it is. So, but the difference is we are requiring it on the live streaming because IMLS wants that data. IMLS doesn't want the other data on recording, so we're not going to bother with that. And then was there another one or should we?
I think you're going to potentially address this, but somebody wanted to know if we do a live recording and then we post the recording.
Sure.
Is that two separate things? One thing? How do you record the stats?
Oh, that's like you're right. That's the first thing we're touching on right here. So when we tell you to give us the number of programs, and this is already virtual programs are their own beast, and this is partly why I have learned in recent months that for many different platforms, if you live stream a program, you are often offered an option immediately after to download a recording that you can then upload to your site and people can see afterwards. So how do you count that? I have told people, please ask yourself, how many times have you performed the program? How many programs did you put on? So if you did that live stream and you hit end on the recording, you've done that program once. If you got a bonus recorded video out of it, fantastic. But you did that program once. It is technically one program. So for those that started out life as a live streaming program and then they had bonus, automatic video recorded program made out of it, it still counts as one program. You put the time and the effort, the energy into the one program. However, you're getting people viewing it live, you're getting people viewing it on the recording. That's two great ways to reach people through the same program. So you're only counting the program once, but we still want your stats from live streaming and from attendance. So feel free to include those views on the recorded ones in your recorded virtual, and feel free to record the views on the live streaming in your recorded live streaming. You can count all of the views, but it's just going to be one program. To that same end, when people said, well, what if we do live streaming programs and we repeat them? We have a story time that we do live streaming at 10 a.m. and we have a story time we do live streaming at 4 p.m. It's the same program, I just do it 2 different times a day for 2 different audiences. Traditionally, we've always counted that as 2 different programs. You're performing it twice, you're getting out the materials and the puppets and the finger plays and doing all of that twice, you get to record it twice or report it twice. So ask yourself how many times you're reporting or performing that program, and that's how many times it gets to count for you. Another question we've seen a lot of is, what's the time cutoff on this? Because programs are getting a lot shorter if you don't have that patron interaction, especially kids programs. If you don't have the kids jumping up and saying, hey, I have a teddy bear too, every 3 seconds, it gets a lot shorter. And that's expected. You're not doing the crafts at the end, it gets shorter. You're not having the discussion questions, it gets shorter, and that's fine. There is no minimum for number. If you have a program that you can do in its entirety that you feel like you've offered it up and you've got this complete thing and it's 15 minutes instead of your usual 30, that's going to count as one. If it ran 35 or 40, that's one. We're not really looking at the time. We know that things are, again, very different because there's not that live interaction on many of those. So just use your best judgment. If you're posting it, it's probably a program. That being said, not everything you post is going to be a program. We've had a lot of questions about, well, we found this really cool site for story times that other people are producing, and we have a great site where we link all of them. Or we found these fantastic free classes, and we have all this adult education site where we post all of these really cool links where people can go to. That is a wonderful service, and I strongly encourage it. It's a great way to help people discover new things. It will not count as a program for you. You have to hit the bare minimum definition of a library program, you have to have some sort of part in the content creation. You have to do something to make that program your own. It may not be a lot. It may be something like introducing a guest speaker, moderating the chat, helping with questions at the end. That's going to count as a program because you set it up, you hosted it, you moderated it. The real life or the in-person equivalent would be inviting a speaker into your library, introducing them, stepping away from the podium. That's still your program because you, again, oversaw it, you moderated it, you had some skin in the game. If you are linking to something and there is nothing in there that is you, if your voice isn't anywhere on that, if your typing isn't anywhere on that, it is purely outside, that is not going to be a program for you. Also, it has to be an actual program that you're counting. We've had some questions about really cool social media interactions, like, well, hey, I have my videos on Facebook, but we have these really cool polls that people have participated in. Which one of these is your favorite Harry Potter character? Where do we count those? We don't count those as programs. Social media is a fantastic way to interact with your patrons, but it's not something we're counting right now. We're not counting just social media interactions. What we're really looking at the moment is programs. So if you're promoting your program and people are responding on that slide and saying, cool, what time is it? That, answer those questions, that's fantastic, but that's not technically a program. That's a social media post about your program. Those aren't going to count towards attendance. The people who actually hop on and view it or hop on and watch it during the time, that's what you'll be counting. So speaking of attendance or views, I've got a lot of questions about Facebook metrics. Depending on what dashboard you use, you can see the people who interacted with posts or videos. You can either see the number reached or the engagement number. And what we're looking for here is reach. The engagement number, according to Facebook, is the number of people who have interacted with your post. So they commented on it, they liked it, they shared it. Whereas reach is the number of people who viewed it, who went on and watched that video, who went through that program. Not everybody who views it is going to interact. So don't worry about engagement. That number is almost certainly going to be lower than your reach. We want reach. We want people, even if they weren't like, I need to type on this when I'm done. If they're watching it, it still counts for you. That being said, Facebook also apparently offers a metric, a 3-second view metric. I would discourage people from using that. I would use the 1-minute view as the minimum as far as participants. The 3-second view in my mind, and again, I like to always try to compare stuff to traditional live programming to see how it fits. In my mind, the 3-second view is the person who opens the door, walks in, sees all the heads swivel towards them and says, oh, yeah, this isn't the bathroom, and then immediately backs out. That's your 3-second view. Your 1-minute view is the person who walks in and says, oh, what's going on here? And just kind of takes it in. Should the 1 minute count? Is there a longer metric we should use? At some point, we're just saying, hey, count this. So don't count the 3 minute, anything beyond that, go ahead. That's going to count on your metric. Apparently Zoom uses something, and I say apparently because I'm seeing screenshots of dashboards. I'm seeing different accounts people's have. Every single one has a slightly different metric or a slightly different way of phrasing it. Zoom offers, the metric you would use on Zoom would be peak consecutive views. It is possible that you have people who are not on during that peak time, who came on just for the first 10 minutes or just for the last 10 minutes. But that is still the closest we could figure out to capturing how many people were there, would be the number that were there at the most time, because people wander in and wander out, but hopefully during the time that Zoom is capturing the most people on at the same time is going to be a good representative number of the people who actually attended. They don't really offer anything that is pure total number of people who were there. This is the closest we can get. I've been asked, should we worry about location? Like if we notice a breakdown, and again, depending on your dashboard, it may let you know, here's the people outside of your local jurisdiction. Here are people from other countries watching your video. And so I was asked, do we need to worry about, like, how do we filter out for local views? And do we need to do that? Don't do that. If you are appealing to kids in Australia, good on you. That totally counts towards your attendance. And again, that live comparison would be if little Susie brought her cousin Kirsten from Sweden to come watch a story time. You're not going to be like, Susie counts, but Kirsten, no, you don't have a card in our system. If they're showing up and attending, you reach somebody. I don't care if they're in your system. I don't care if they're in Canada. It still counts. So do not worry about messing with ISPs unless, again, it's something you're interested in and you want to take it to your board and say, hey, look at this. People across the world think I'm a great storyteller or think I am fantastic at leading book groups. So that's for you. If you want it, we don't need to know about it. Multiple attendees per device. I've had some people ask, well, what do we do with the fact that we know that some people are logging on, but they have multiple kids with them, or they're watching with their spouse, or what do we do then? Do we need to take a roll call? Do we need to have a second person moderating this with us so that they can go through and try to see all the people in the windows? And this is where I would say, tell us what you reasonably know to be true. If you see that you have this many people logged on for a story time, and you know just from interacting with people that, hey, I know it's not just the mom. I can see she's holding a baby in her hand. Or I know that, someone said, oh, hey, my little sister's here with me. If you know that there's multiple people, go ahead and count them. I don't think you need to be as formal as going through and taking a roll call and going through, each and every person. How many people are on your line? How many people are on your screen? Just give us your best number. If you need to add a couple people on, if you said, okay, Zoom told me I had this many people, but I know there were multiple ones where there were multiple children involved, not just the one. If you need to tack on a few, give us the best number that you know without going above and beyond and having to ask every single person. If you want to, that's fantastic. But again, I feel like that's an undue burden on us. Do your best to give us those numbers, because what we want is that story. We want to know roughly how many people started using virtual programming. We want to be able to track it from this point out, from years to years, those numbers. If you lost one person because you didn't realize that there was a baby off screen, it's okay. And I believe those are the most common questions we had. And perfect. I was wow, 11 minutes. So I was hoping to leave at least 10 minutes for questions. So you guys got a bonus minute. I know there were probably some that I did not answer directly, that maybe I didn't hit your exact question or things that came up. So if you want to fire stuff at me and see how quickly on the fly I can think, let's do it.
So do you want me to kind of go through and share
That'd be
some questions with
fantastic.
you? Okay. So let's see. The first question that we had towards the beginning, I am scrolling, was from Albert, and he wanted to know, is ISL keeping statistics of reference questions seeking information from government and government resources like federal, U.S., state, local organizations, et cetera? So I would assume that would fit in with any other reference question, but I'll let you.
It would. It would. So we are not doing that deep a data dive. We're not breaking it out into government and non-government. I do know that there is some discussion among directors about how many government questions or government related, website related questions they're getting. I do know that it is something IFL, the Indiana, I can't speak today. I'm so sorry. ILF, the Indiana Library Federation, has discussed doing a series of smaller polls to try to capture some of this very detailed things if libraries are interested. And we might be seeing some of those roll out. They might be helping with some of those deep data dives and metrics that we aren't able to do on our scale. But we won't be asking that on our annual report.
Next question. Does an increase in access of Wi-Fi include purchase of hotspots? I'm going to assume you mean hotspots that you're loaning out to patrons? If so, what would you say?
Mm-hmm. If it's hotspots that you're loaning out, first of all, I will say there is a question in our annual report that, first of all, do you have hotspots? And you're right, it doesn't specifically ask, have you increased hotspots? It is not going to count for Wi-Fi in the sense that what they're really looking for here is, that parking lot, that campus, after hours sort of things. If you change that, just know that your hotspots will probably be captured in your circulation. But again, that's not data that we're going to be able to break out at that level.
Next question is open by appointment only considered closed or limited opening?
Ooh. You
know
what?
like I'm limited to me, but
the reason I pause is IMLS is so serious about keeping the integrity of the data from year to year, and open hours have meant, always open. So I don't know with the limited. I would say my instinct is to say that is limited hours if it's open to the public, but not to the full public or not to the full hours. Let me do a little bit of digging on that, and I can share out to the listservs. I think that's a great question, and I will share that out. And come November, when we talk about all of this again at the annual report, I'll make sure to clarify. But I don't know that one right now.
Okay. Next question. Do we count it for time of limited services even if hours have returned to normal? So I would guess this means like if they've been closed and then they open, or, during the period of quote unquote COVID.
Oh, sure. No, we're looking for the number of weeks that your service was limited. So if you shut down or you closed or had limited services for 4 weeks, and then you said, you know what, we're in a community in a position where we can open back up earlier than a lot of people, your answer would be 4 weeks. Your specific library had limited hours for those 4 weeks. Doesn't matter what the people around you were doing. So or doesn't matter if the rest of the world was considered still in, COVID phase 3 or whatever. We're not looking for what phase you're in or how the rest of the people are doing, but how did it impact your library directly? Your library was closed this many weeks during 2020 because of COVID. Your library was limited hours this many weeks during 2020 because of COVID.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. We have quite a few.
Mhm.
We'll just get through as many as we can. So we are supposed to be including one-on-one reference services as part of the total reference questions? Question mark.
Yes, we have always counted one-on-one as reference questions. We require that you tell us how many reference questions you have. We just have one question that says, how many reference transactions did you have that year? And again, it can be the short ones, it can be the longer one, it's the total. For libraries that have gone that extra mile, that have gone above and beyond and said, yeah, those are different. We want instructional different. We're going to ask them that second question, which is, hey, if you tabulate that separately, how many of those questions you just told us about, how many of those are instructional reference? So reference includes everything, the short ones, the big ones. There's just a second question that says, hey, if you happen to know how many of those big, long instructional ones, tell us.
Okay. And then we had a few questions specifically about programming.
Okay.
So one of them is there any space there for hybrid programming? For instance, a video that's followed by a Q&A, how would we count that? And I would assume that would all be one program, right? And
Mhm.
if it's one program, you count it as one program, but do you have any
Yeah, if
additional?
I'm understanding right, so it would be live in the sense that you're sharing that video. The video is recording, but you're sharing it maybe via live stream, or people are watching it at the same time, this recorded video, and then afterwards you're having a discussion. So kind of like a movie discussion might be in person. That would count because there's a live element to it, because you're assuming that that Q&A is happening in live time, that's happening right afterwards and not something that's posted long after. If it's happening in real time, that would be a live program, and you would just count everything in or that live virtual program. If the question and answer is something that's posted afterward, I would have to know a little bit more about if that's what it is, or if I'm missing how this is a hybrid.
Well, we do have another question later
Mhm.
on, and they ask a similar question. And in that one, they want to know if you post a live video or, I'm sorry, a recorded video, but then there's live chat that the librarian is leading or the library staff is leading, then that would be a live.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, any program that has a real-time element to it. So you're interacting in real time. If you have that element, even if it includes recorded programs, you're sharing that video clip, you're watching this together, you're listening to this audio clip together. If you have that real-time interaction, that's what pushes it into the virtual live program.
Okay. And then somebody said, and I think you probably answered this earlier, but if we do a live program recording or video, sorry,
Mhm.
and then we put the recording out, does this count twice? And that's no, because you did it one time, so it's one program, right?
Exactly. If you do a live program and you get to upload a recording of that program, if it was saved to be uploaded later, it counts as one. Again, that live element trumps the other, so it's going to count as one virtual live program. You're going to count the live streaming attendees as virtual, as your live attendees. If you post it separately, you don't get accounted as or like if you post it as a video separately, you don't get accounted a second time as a program, but you can go ahead and take those hits that it's accruing and roll those into your recorded attendance numbers.
Okay. The next thing is, what about a program like a digital escape room, um, that they have created? So they created the digital escape room, but then of course people can do it on their own time.
I would, because it's asynchronous, because it is happening separately, that would be a recorded program. It's a really cool recorded program, but that would be a recorded program.
Okay. So right now it's 11:58, and let's see, we still have quite a few questions left, but just in case there's anyone who needs to leave, I'm going to go ahead and post the LEU certificate and the link. Well, I'll start with posting the LEU certificate. Hold on one second. Let me just attach it here. Um, doo-doo-doo. Uh, Hey, Angela, is your last slide, does it have our email addresses on it?
Oh, I'm
Would you be
sorry,
able
it
to?
does. Hold on just a second. I didn't
Okay.
go far enough. There we go.
Okay.
And I can't stress this enough. We are really figuring this out on the fly. This is new for everybody. All of the state libraries are trying to figure out these new and cool hybrid programs and how to quantify them and what counts for what. And just as you're trying to figure out how to quantify them, we're in the same boat. So don't be afraid to send them my way. It may take me a couple days of mulling over or conferring with my fellow state data people to make sure we're all on the same page, but we'll figure it out at some point before December. So
Okay. And then, so I've attached a Word document, but if that does not download for you, you can request, so I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. You can request your LEU certificate by filling out a form I'm going to post here in a second. So you can click on that, fill out that form, and I will email you with the blank LEU certificate. I will be sending out the recording to everyone who registered. So you will get this recording. And Angela, do you want to stick around and try to answer more questions, or should we call it a day?
As long as people are hanging around, this is what I plan to do this afternoon or this morning or whatever we're at.
Oh, there goes the fire trucks by the state library there.
Yeah, right next
to
to
the background. Okay, so let me get back to where we were. We answered that one. We answered that one. Digital escape rooms, we answered that. Sorry, guys. Okay. We have been doing program in a box. We would count the number of boxes taken. Then we also record a video of staff demonstrating the activity. Could we also count that as a recorded program? So it's like two components to one program. One of them is making a video with instructions. One of them is the physical craft. And they want to know if they're separate or, I guess, one thing.
So the way that I'm understanding it, it's going to be captured in two different questions, and that's okay in this particular instance because one of them's just a yes and no. That box part of it, you're going to be able to answer yes when it says, you have grab and go or make and take crafts? Yes, that's going to be the box element of it. The part where you record it, assuming that recording is somewhat, essential to how they do it, to figuring out how to put it together or interact with it, that recording can indeed count as a virtual recorded program, and the hits would count that way. So yes, you have a make and take element, but yes, the recording is counting towards a recorded virtual program.
Okay. Next question. Somebody wants to know if their library has a blog, is there anywhere to record blog statistics, like hits on a blog, or is that something totally not?
That is not something we have tracked at national level or the state level. And that kind of goes to what I was saying about Facebook polls or social media interactions. It is a fantastic way to interact with your patrons, but right now that is not it's not something we're measuring. I would encourage people, if they have a great interactive blog, keep track of that. And again, make sure that your community knows about it, that it's something that you can use to advocate for your library and to build on that. But yeah, there's nowhere in our report that asks about views or interactions with social media posts that are not programs.
Okay. Ruth Guthrie also was asking about hybrid programs, and I believe you have answered that. George wants to know, is the quote limited hours? Is it just limited hours, or are we also considering limitations to capacity and types of uses of the library?
I believe it is limited hours. It's not going to be services. I don't believe it will even be capacity. And to be honest, I don't think a lot of people are having issues with people being turned away because of capacity. It is my understanding the limited refers strictly to hours open.
Okay.
So even if you say yes, but we're limited because we only offer half the computers because we turned off every other pack to social, that's fine. That's fine. Again, they're just looking for a very basic data point here, which is during 2020, how many libraries had to close completely during, how many weeks did they close completely? How many weeks did they offer limited opening, and that's what that would capture.
Okay. We have kind of a technical question that I'm not sure whether we can answer, but Bethany wanted to know regarding putting recordings on multiple platforms. Do you recommend uploading the entire videos to Facebook as well as YouTube, for instance, instead of only sharing the YouTube link to the recording on Facebook? Because without the full Facebook video upload, no reach statistics can be gathered. So only one platform would be available. I mean, if that is the case and you want to make sure you get all those counted, then what you suggested might be the best solution, Bethany. But I mean, that's probably up to each individual library, how they want to manage that and keep track. Do you have any comments, Angela? Or
And without having tried to do this myself, I may be misunderstanding this. My first thought was, if you are posting it to multiple platforms, if you have your own YouTube channel, but you also have a way to post it, the video directly, embed it in your Facebook, and people could watch it on your Facebook, or they could watch it on your YouTube. It's one program, but you can count as many. You can post it everywhere you can think of. If you're trying to get those hits and try to expand your reach, that's fantastic. You can count all of those hits. It's still just, regardless of how many platforms you use, it's still just the one program. As far as what I would recommend, that goes beyond my technical expertise. I unfortunately have not played around with posting videos. Beth can attest to this. I barely played around with webinars at this point. So that may be something that if you're looking to see what works best or what ones have the best metrics to gather, that may be something fellow programmers could help with. Or if I'm misunderstanding the question, feel free to shoot me an email and say, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, you can always send out an email on listservs, or you could join one of our virtual roundtables, and I'm sure other librarians would be happy to chat with you about that. So we have another question about limited hours. What if the library opens regular hours but limits to 30-minute grab and go, etc.? Is that still considered limited? I mean, that kind of goes along with what you were saying about capacity, because that's really effectively limiting capacity, which you think is not important, right? It's just, are you open for your full hours?
You know what? I am going to take a moment and I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to pull up the data elements and see exactly what that definition is. So feel free to keep asking me questions and I'll see if I can multitask. I might not be able to.
Okay.
But if I can find that, we might just be able to get the definitive answer right here, right now.
Okay. Let's see, we have more technical. We already had a question about digital escape room. I include a live element where they have to email us during a certain time slot to get the last answer. So that does sound like there's a live element to it. So it would be a live program then, right? Yes. We're actually down to where we're actually through most of the questions unless we have a bunch of questions after I send out the LEU certificate. So you keep doing what you're doing, Angela. I will scan through here and see what else we have. Somebody's requested the link. I'm going to post the LEU link again for the person who requested that. Okay. Thanks everybody for your patience.
Yes.
Okay, we did that. For programs posted on YouTube, would we just count the number of views?
I do not know what metrics are available. That makes sense to me. If somebody wants to let me know, like, oh no, we have views, but they also offer this other added enhanced metric. If you can tell me what it is, I might change my mind, but right now the views is really what we're looking for. And I know that's not as broken down as, YouTube views may not tell you, well, how many were 3 seconds, how many were a minute, how many. that's fine. As I said, that's part of what makes this digital programming so tricky, is that every platform seems to have its own way of measuring things and its own statistics and metrics that it uses. So we're trying to find the closest we can across the platforms and know that this is not a precise science.
Okay. Kelly says, we're doing a podcast. She wants to know, would those be recorded as recorded listens? Is that an element on the survey? Have you had the podcast question before?
I have not had the podcast question. That may be one that I have to come back on.
Okay.
So podcast.
Yeah.
And when I say
I'll write
come
down.
back,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll follow up directly with an email with you on that one. As far as the limited hours, I'm going to try to share out to the entire group because I think there were enough questions about what exactly we meant by limited hours.
Okay. Will the what counts as a program handout be updated to include some of the questions from today's presentation? Excellent question.
Yes, I would very much like to update it. In my dream world, on our annual report page under 2020 annual report, we would have a subsection that would include questions on virtual programming, which will be updated, maybe include a link to this webinar or a link to where to find it, all sorts of good stuff. It is a work in progress. We're juggling a couple things right now, but we definitely, I will try to get some of those most common questions up there, maybe as a frequently asked questions addendum that we can add on to that, but look to that to be updated at some point in the future. We want to try to keep that the most current, and we are getting more information, so I'm hopefully get that to you sooner than later.
Did we touch on curbside and how or if we are reflecting this in the stats?
So curbside is only going to be captured as a yes/no right now. And that is simply going to be, did you offer outside service, is how IMLS questions it, and it's going to be a yes/no. We've had some people already tell us, well, I really think we should offer, that should be our library being open because we're open for curbside. We have staff working in the building. It takes time, it takes energy. In some ways, it's harder than being open to the public because we're running stuff down and we're fielding the phone calls. And it is different and it is difficult, but we do not want to include it in open hours because, again, we want to keep the integrity of that data element. And for the past decades, open hours has meant the doors are literally open and patrons can walk in and interact with your materials and with your staff. And that is not the same. It's not available in the same way during curbside. So right now, curbside does not count as open hours. It only counts yes or no. Did you offer it? The circulation you get through curbside will obviously be rolled into your data at the end of the year. And that right now is how we're capturing it.
Okay, just a couple more. I think we're almost there. Sarah shared, she's the one who asked earlier about where you post things, I think. She said on YouTube, you can see both the total views of a video and the views that were logged as the video premiered. So you can kind of see both of them, just an FYI.
Oh, yeah.
George
Go ahead and do the total then. Yeah, we're, you know, it doesn't matter if they're coming in late to the party, it still counts.
George wants to know, when libraries are engaging on social media, should those be counted as reference questions, assuming it was an actual question? So if a patron asks for a book recommendation or is the library open or something, would that be a reference question? I've never thought about that.
I haven't either. I see that as a type of remote reference. We're counting that. If it is a genuine reference question, you know, not just, again, chatting about your Harry Potter favorite character, that's cool. But if someone says, hey, you know, can you make a book recommendation? You know, can you help me find something similar to this? Or can you point me towards a list of the greatest cozy mysteries or whatever? If you would consider it a reference question, if they asked it to your face at the reference desk, go ahead and count it.
Okay. Sue says, when we were open, we counted each person that picked up curbside as a patron coming into the or as a patron coming to the library. Should I use this data reported for annual report as a number of people that visited the library?
No, no. And see, and I absolutely understand why you would do that. But that's the distinction I was trying to make, where I can see the argument and IMLS sees the argument, and this was really hotly debated for a while. But the fact that, yes, they came to your library, like they physically left their house and said, I am making the library my destination. And yet we are not counting it as visits because it is not the same as visits in years past. It does not, the options aren't the same, the opportunities aren't the same, and we don't want to kind of contaminate that past data, if you will, by clumping it all together. So we're going to say, no, that doesn't count. That means those numbers aren't captured as visits. Those visits are going down, but at least we have somewhere to say, yes, we did curbside service. So again, it's not going to be quantitative. You won't have to report a number to us as to how many people you did. It might be great to hang on to those numbers for your own purposes, but they are not considered part of open hour services or visits, I should say.
Okay. Somebody wants to know if they recorded, I'm paraphrasing, but if they recorded a video like on how to use a database, for instance, and then patrons watch that, is that a program or not? And if not, then how would they? She says it's similar to a computer class program.
This is where I would say use your best discretion. If you think it is similar content to a computer program, if you feel like, yeah, it's pretty similar to if someone came in and recorded me in front of a class of people saying, okay, I'm going to step you through the basics of Microsoft Word or through the resume wizard or whatnot. If it's similar to that, if you feel like what you're presenting is arguably program material that you could go up and do that in front of people, I would say count it. If it's not, if it doesn't meet that threshold, if you're like, yeah, no, this is a really cool service I offered, we have this great idea, we have, ask yourself, if you were able to do this live and in person, would you perform this as a program? So if that content that you're offering is something you would do in front of a class for computers, fantastic, count that. If not, I would say that's another sort of social media post or another sort of post that is a great service, but not a specific service we break out.
Okay. All right. I'm going to do, we have 2 last questions, and then I am going to cut off the questions for now. Although if you have more questions, you're always welcome to email Angela and ask her specific things. But just for the sake of time and everyone going to their lunch hour potentially. So Ashley wants to know, she says, we post a weekly trivia question for our patrons, I would assume on either Facebook or their website. Like an example is guess the book cover, guess the book title. Would, excuse me, would that count as anything? Would it be a reference question or a recorded program?
It wouldn't. That falls into that broader social media where it's a cool interaction, but it doesn't trip those definitions that we're looking for very distinct things with programs. It doesn't hit that programming definition as far as, offering. There's a whole list of, does it teach about the library? Is it instructional? Is it entertain? It doesn't technically hit all of that checklist for program. It's not really a reference question because you're not answering a question for them. You're kind of playing a really cool online game with them, but that's just going to count for yourself as a social media hit. Okay. But we're not tracking social media at this point.
Okay. And then one very last question, Catherine wants to know, basically when they're recording things, do they need to keep track of, specifically she asked about social media, do you need to keep track of your locations where these things are taking place, or is it just for the total library system? And I think I can answer that it's for the total library system, right?
It is.
Is the state nor the federal really cares like which branch it's at necessarily, do they?
No.
You can keep
they
track
all
of that
get
for
rolled
yourself.
Back together when we share it out. Really, we don't tend to break down, I think, anything at the branch level. We want to know how many branches you have, and we like to know their addresses for our directory, but yeah, there's not a ton of breakdown at the branch level. We roll all of those numbers into your system statistics.
All right. Well, I think that is it. Thanks everybody who stayed late for the extra questions. Obviously, if you didn't stay late, hopefully, if you wanted to know the answers to some of those, you can watch the end of the recording. And I want to thank Angela again for being awesome and a fountain of knowledge. And like she said, we're all just trying to figure this out together. It's new for everybody. And I also just wanted to stress one last time that everybody's stats are going down. Don't worry about it. It's okay. And that there are other ways to tell our stories during this time. So keep track of what what your patrons are saying about your services. All right, I am going to sign off. The LEU link was in there, but I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera. And if anybody needs to grab the link, we'll leave this on for another couple minutes. But have a great day, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.